Thank you for staying with us. Now, while U.S.-China trade tensions continue to escalate, Africa is quietly putting together a free trade agreement that spans the continent. The Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement came to force on Thursday after clearing a key procedural hurdle and being ratified by the parliaments of 24 countries. Albert Muchanga, the AU's Commissioner for Trade and Industry, celebrated the news, dubbing it as a titanic milestone. In studio to break this down for us is Francisca Ochieng, an economist, and CEO of Faverhub, a premier online retail fulfillment business for organic products. She is an investment specialist and former management consultant. Thank you so much, Francisca, for joining us today here on Bottom Line Africa.
Yeah.
Now, I want to start with a tweet from Albert Muchanga there, the AU Commissioner for Trade. He says, historic milestone, the agreement has come into force. We celebrate the triumph of bold, pragmatic and continent-wide commitment to economic integration. We launched the market on 7th July 2019 and begin the journey of transformation to secure inclusive prosperity. Quite excited there.
Very.
So what difference will this agreement make, Francisca?
I mean, so far, I also celebrate that move. We expect that the spending power as a result of this intra-African trade agreement will rise up to $6.7 trillion by the year 2020. This is coming in from expert economists as well. And then also the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa is estimating that trade should actually go up by 15 to 25%, which is about 50 to 70 billion dollars within the span from it being operationalized July 7th this year up to 2040. So this is really, really a huge milestone. Yeah.
Great. There's also been the question of Africa trading less with itself compared to how it trades with the rest of the world. This has really come up, especially after this agreement. What are your views on that?
Yes, so far it's because some of our economies are a bit insular. We have, despite the fact that we have trade agreements that are still in place, we have layers and layers of barriers of entry towards each other. Sometimes even just bringing goods from Uganda, you can be taxed at a very high rate. So some of the issues that rise from that would be, let's say, taxations we have in place, or high tariffs. And so that really makes us close our border towards each other. And this now hampers resource allocation that we should share among each other. Yes.
Now, Francisca, there's someone who's probably watching and doesn't even know what the agreement means for them or what it's going to do for them. So could you just talk to that person and tell them more in terms of maybe reducing the tariffs, right? Just tell our viewer who could probably not know about this agreement what it really means for them as a person.
What this agreement also means is that if, let's say, I sketch a vehicle here and I want it to be modelized and to come into life, and our brothers in Tanzania have infrastructure available for vehicular assembly, I can take that blueprint there and they can actually design, they can actually now bond that vehicle together without taxing me, for example, because I'm bringing jobs to the Tanzanian economy. And then when that vehicle is assembled and ready, it is now back to the Kenyan market, and the Kenyan taxing agency will not really tax me for saying my goods were made in Tanzania. And then also this agreement is making sure that when you want to import cacao beans, for example, from Ghana or Uganda, they become readily available for you without having to go through the implicit taxations or other barriers of entry that we tend to have into this market. It also just means that if you're running an e-commerce business, your goods would be more welcomed in signatories like Burkina Faso or South Africa or Egypt, for example. Yeah.
And indeed, speaking of Burkina Faso, it's actually the latest to join, I believe, on Wednesday, right? And so far, 24 out of 54 African countries have ratified, right? Among them Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, Egypt, and so on. But notably Nigeria, which is the Africa's largest populous country and with the largest economy rather, it is yet to sign up. Is this cause for alarm, or do they have more time?
When I went through some of the documents that were around this agreement, they were showing that they needed a minimum majority for this to pass, whether you join it or not. I'm not sure yet what the implication would be for those who are still sitting out in the cold, but I'm also hoping that when they begin to see the benefits that some of us who have ratified it would be reaping out of it, they would join us, especially them being a really, really huge energy supplier for the rest of the world. Yeah.
What is the key thing that we are expected to, what this agreement is expected to achieve?
In the simplest term, this agreement is supposed to make us trade with each other and not run to Europe with our flowers or run to China with our garlic or run to I don't know where with our coffee. We consider each other first and make our resources and allocate our resources and raw materials to one another as well. Yes.
Great. But there's also been the critics, Francisca, who talk about, poor infrastructure in the African nations. What are some of the challenges that are expected, to be seen before, it takes effect in July? What are some of the challenges?
Yeah, some of the challenges is that we're still trying to understand if this is a symbolic move, so it just becomes a continental symbol, or if it will really be operational to its fullest extent. So some of the things that are yet to be cleared up are, for example, negotiations. There are two phases of the negotiations. Number one, in phase one, we have issues like origin of goods. Now, in origin of goods, this is where small and medium enterprises could be affected. So, for example, if you're manufacturing, for example, textile here, or let's just say a finished personal care product, in the COMESA trade agreement, 35% of your product has to be, let's say, made in Kenya for you to trade within the COMESA region. Now, if let's say for the origin of goods, they say 50% has to be made in Kenya. We know that some input have to come from India or China or Indonesia. Now, does it mean that your product is disqualified from benefiting from the trade agreements that we have in place? Another challenge that would be there would be competition and intellectual property protection. So if I'm on this side of the world, and someone from Burkina Faso or Zimbabwe wants to bring in their tissue paper, for example, or household effects, for example, does it mean that I also can take my stuff there? Does it mean that their stuff will now compete with mine to the point that it erodes my margin? Another thing is that some of the things have not been really clearly discussed in the phase two. Those include intellectual property, include competition, and they've not barely been touched. Another issue is that you don't know who's negotiating with whom, which country is negotiating with whom, in what context, for example. And so they need to set up like a roadmap on the unknowns that they still need to address. Yeah.
Sure. And critics have also talked about the lack of diversity.
Yes, lack of diversity, and then also for other countries, for example, there's the most favored nation concept and clause, which is in there. So let's say like Kenya can decide to favor Zambia for corn, and that means does it exclude Uganda? But under most favored nation, with the same offer that we make to Zambia, other countries should be able to compete with that same exact offer. So diversifying opportunities and offering opportunities to other countries, those are still some of the items that are still under negotiation in phase one. Yes.
Great. And I like that you've told us, some of the things that are under negotiation, as you did say there. But it came to effect on Thursday, the 30th of May, but the countries have until July the 7th, right, to work on these details. Just what could some of these details be?
Those would now be the things I've highlighted.
The ones that you're taking us through
they
the
need to set up like the percentage for the origin of goods. They need to also, let's say, in some form, shape and form, enforce commitment. A country can sign today, but then they could lag their participation from 2025. And perhaps if their clause is not protecting that, they cannot be enforced to participate. Again, there are other things in their competition laws. There are other things in there like setting up the schedules of the tariffs as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, as we wrap up the conversation, it's been said that if all countries sign up, it will be the largest free trade area since the formation of the World Trade Organization. That was in 1994, right? Maybe you could just take us through that.
Actually, already it is. From 1994, when the WTO was set up, as is with the just 24 nations coming in, it already is one of the largest free trade areas in the world. And also this would also make our, I think IMF published a report saying that this would give us the highest, would improve our global competitive index. Therefore, our products would also be accessible to other free trade areas within the globe. Yes.
Great. And maybe as your parting shot, you could once again just talk, especially just take it down now to Kenya and what it means for our viewer, just part of your parting shot.
What this means for us as Kenya, it's first of all a good milestone that we're a participant to this. It means that our agricultural commodities, which we run with to Europe or beyond our borders, we can easily supply within. It also means that when we're now importing for resources and raw materials to do the value addition to our products, it makes it a bit easy. Because some small and medium enterprises, they usually bemoan the taxation process or the rigorous process when you're trying to now access your goods when they land from the border. So this really means that when you go to Uganda for shopping, or Ethiopia or other signatories like Egypt, your product, you will not waste, like, let's say 3 months in your production cycle while waiting for your goods to clear from the border.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Francisca Ochieng, an investment specialist and consultant, right? Of course, she was talking to us more on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which came to effect